Welcome to Powerless Penguins United Big Book main share this week. I am incredibly pleased to introduce Mags D, who's kindly agreed to come and share for us. Mags, over to you.
Morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Happy Saturday and welcome to the first week of the Penguins Big Book study. I'm delighted to be a penguin. It's not very often you get to say that about yourself. Thank you for asking me to be here and to be of service. Thank you to everyone that is being of service in this army that you have working in the background, and for making all of this possible. It's great to see some familiar faces from all over the planet. Gosh, we've got from one corner to the next. So yeah, thank you so much. Great to see everybody. So Julian and the gang have asked me to come and do a book study, and I am going to, over whatever period of time, endeavour to share with you the truth of Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I say that, what I mean is that I'm just going to share with you the big book and the 164 pages and some of my experiences of having been through that with my sponsor. It's important to note that I have a sponsor. It's important to note that I sponsor other people because that's part of my 12th step. And that is an integral part of my recovered state. I don't do this 12-step stuff because you're an alcoholic or an addict. I do it because I am. It's part of my prescription, and therefore it has to be part of my way of living. Now, ultimately, it's a win-win situation, isn't it? If you get a sponsor, the sponsor benefits, and the sponsor benefits from sponsoring you. So yeah, it's a win-win. So what we'll do is get our eyes down, look in, as they say at the bingo. I don't know actually whether they do say that at the bingo or not. I've never been, but I hear it all the time. So, you know, we pick up these little things, don't we? And we don't even know where they came from. And there's a little bit for me that in the rooms, there's little bits that have been said and we pick up and we repeat them and we don't actually know where they're from in the big book, and they're used out of context and applied to things that they don't actually apply to. And therefore, as we go through the next number of weeks, we're probably going to bust a number of myths of some of the things that you hear and what you think they're related to, when in actual fact, they're not related to that at all. So I suppose we'll get some clarity as well as we go through the weeks. So I'm starting at the cover page, which is the page that has Alcoholics Anonymous right at the top of it in big words. Right at the top, and there's the little piece underneath where it talks about the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. So when I talk about the front cover page right the way through to 164, this is the page that I'm talking about. Okay. Now, I don't know how you guys work this with your sponsor. That's your business, not mine. What I will do over the next lot of weeks is, you know, point out particular lines in addition to those that are already italicized in the book, because anything that's italicized is an important point that the first 100 want to emphasize. And you know what? It's really important to know this. Well, it's not really important to know it, but it's interesting. Think of when this book was printed nearly 90 years ago. They had to put a lot of time and effort into changing the print run, to change the font from just normal font into italics. They spent diligent time making sure that they had the information italicized. You know, they weren't using a PC or a laptop or whatever to click a button to turn it into italics. They made a decision to change the print run, to be able to change the letters, to emphasize to you how important the words were. Okay, so when it's italicized, pay attention. They're trying to send you an alert. They're trying to send you something for you to be totally and utterly aware of and not to be mistaken about what it is saying at that point. Now, that's notwithstanding the fact that all of the words in the book are incredibly important, and they chose them with such definition, with such certainty, to be able to convince us of this solution. So I'm going to ask you for just a quick little exercise. If I was to ask you, and type it into the chat probably really quickly, and I'll share a couple of them just for the purposes of the recording. But if I was to ask you what your addiction or what your alcoholism is, what would it be to you? What would be the words that you would use to describe it? Just pop the words in. Doesn't matter what they are, but if I'm asking you the question, what is your addiction? What is your alcoholism? Right now, where you are. Okay. Powerlessness, pain, hell, poison, escapism. It's now love, obsession, fuel. Okay, so insanity, chaos. Okay, the point here being that your addiction, your alcoholism, from what's being put in the chat here, is something different to every single person in this room. It means something different to every single person in this room, which ultimately will mean that everybody's here for a different reason, which will ultimately mean that everybody here has come here under different circumstances. The reason why my friend Lou is in the room might be different from the reason my friend Julian is in the room. But I have to emphasize that whatever got you here, whatever you believe your addiction and your alcoholism is, the solution is the same. And the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is the only place that you will find the truth of how one can recover from alcoholism, from addiction. So if you're sitting here thinking that you're going to find something that's very unique and exceptional to you with regards to the solution, you're not. You're going to get the clear-cut directions that's set out in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that hasn't changed for nearly 90 years. Not one word of this book has changed in nearly 90 years. There's a little quote at the back of the book that has been put in 1947, and I'll point that out to you when we get to that point. But not one word in the 164 pages has changed in nearly 90 years. But the power of this book is that it has the power to change us. So the big words at the top, Alcoholics Anonymous, that's the book. The meetings, the fellowship are called after the big book. The fellowship in which you sit in CA is the fellowship of CA. The meetings are only one part of the solution. Okay, so meetings by themselves do not make it. You'll hear in the rooms people saying many meetings make it, not by themselves. Many meetings by themselves do not make it. And we'll go on to understand why in a moment. The first promise in the book, you'll hear in the rooms the 12-step promises being read out, and they'll call them the 12-step promises. They're not the 12-step promises. They're the 9th-step promises. When we are painstaking about this phase of our development, you'll be amazed before you're halfway through. If you recall that, they're the 9th-step promises. They're not the 12-step promises. There's promises peppered the whole way through the book. And what we're going to do over the next number of weeks is understand each and every single one of those promises. And this is the first one. The story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism, addiction. So what they're going to show is, they're telling us here in the first little piece of text in the book that they're going to give us the chain of events. That's the story. They're going to talk us through the chain of events as to how they have recovered past tense from alcoholism. Recovered. There's 17 times in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous where they specifically talk about the fact that we have recovered past tense. There's 2 points in the book, and I'll point these out to you, where they talk about recovering. And that's when someone is convalescing. They are recovering. But having had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps, I can tell you now that I have recovered. I have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. And it points that out on page 20 of the book, but we'll get to that point when we get to that point. So I don't talk about being a recovering alcoholic because I'm not recovering for the rest of my life. I'm not. I've recovered. I've had a spiritual awakening as the result of the steps. The alcohol thing has disappeared. It's been removed. It's been solved. And all of the words that I use, removed, disappeared, and solved, are in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I can tell you that that is what has happened to me, simply by following the clear-cut directions that are set out in such masterly detail in the book. Now, another little thing, maybe a little myth to bust. Alcohol, when you hear sometimes in the rooms, they talk about alcoholism, and people emphasize the ism. You know, I have alcoholism. I'm like, right, okay. Yeah, I've got it too. I'm an alcoholic. I've got alcoholism. What's the big deal with the ism? Why is there why is the differentiation in the way that we say that? Because it's like, my nephew is autistic. His condition is autism. I'm an alcoholic. My condition is alcoholism. But in the rooms, we have found this little way of trying to help the newcomer, when in actual fact it is not helping the newcomer whatsoever, to talk about the ism. I've got the ism. What is that? Your first day in the room. Oh, I've got the ism. It's the I, the self, the me. Really? As a newcomer sitting in the room, my alcoholism, I don't even know whether I am an alcoholic or not, but I'm sitting here dying of addiction, and you're telling me it's an ism? You're telling me it's the I, the self, the me? How could it be me? How could it be? I'm trying every single thing to try and stop this. How is it the I, the self, and me? Oh, we're selfish and self-centered to the core. It's the I, the self, the me. Really? Okay. But for the newcomer coming into the rooms who's dying and who wants a solution, to tell them it's the ism doesn't make any sense. The I, the self, the me doesn't make any sense. We've got to talk to them about step one. We've got to help them learn and grow where they're planted. They have to understand what it means. Step one in the short form on the scrolls on the wall that's read out time and time and time again from chapter 5, how it works. They've got to understand step one in the long form. All they're seeing when they come into the rooms and all they're hearing is somebody reading the 12 steps saying, we admit it, we were part of sober alcohol and our lives have become unmanageable. What does that mean? There's no ism in there. There's no I, self, me in there. We've got to help them understand the powerlessness and how that leads to the unmanageability of their life. So, from that perspective, we got to tell them the truth. That's why we've got to encourage people to get a sponsor as soon as they come in. We don't hang about and wait. We work this program like the desperation of a drowning man. You don't wait 2 years after you've come out of rehab to start the steps and get a sponsor. No, you work this program like the desperation of a drowning man. You come in, you join the fellowship, and you get started. So for those of you that have a big book in front of you, I hope that you do, because we're going to dance through these pages over the next lot of months. If you have the English version of the book that is printed, you'll have beautiful white pages, And beneath that first little promise, beneath the 4th edition, you'll have the circle and the triangle. If you're in the United States or you're using the US printed on the little yellowy pages, as I call them, you won't have the circle and the triangle on this first page, because there was some sort of discussion about the fact that they couldn't be used in the US. But we're lucky enough here in the UK to have the circle and the triangle, which is, I'm going to explain to you right now. Julian, if it's helpful, I'll probably post to you a little photograph of that front cover page if anybody wants to make notes on it. But for the purposes of now, I'm just going to talk it through. If you understand the circle and the triangle, in this first page, it holds a lot of information about what our program of recovery is about. So the triangle, we look at the base of the triangle. It's all about recovery. It's all about the mind. The base of the triangle is the 12 steps. They're the 12 spiritual principles by which I, the alcoholic addict, is governed, basically. Governed's probably the wrong word. But the base of the triangle is about my recovery. The 12 steps are there to guide me, and that's for my mind. On the left-hand side of the triangle, when you look down on it, you'll see unity. That's about the fellowship. That's about the groups. The groups are guided by the 12 traditions. They're the 12 spiritual principles by which the groups are guided. That's where you physically take yourself to an online meeting. That's where you physically take yourself to a meeting. Then on the right-hand side of the triangle, when you look at it, you see the word service. That's for the fellowship across the entire world. That the 12 spiritual principles by which they're guided are the 12 concepts of world service. That's the spiritual side of things. So in that triangle, what you've got are the 36 spiritual principles, which are talked about in the first step at a very particular point. And I will point all of this out to you as we go through. So in that triangle, you've got the mind, the body, and the spirit covered. You've got the mental, the physical, the spiritual side covered. Those 36 spiritual principles. Surrounded by that circle is how we become complete. The circle that surrounds the triangle demonstrates the fact that we become complete. The circle around the triangle talks about that's related to being rocketed to the 4th dimension of existence. When we have this spiritual awakening as a result of the steps, when we practice these 36 spiritual principles in all of our affairs, when we're right in the center of that triangle, that's when we become whole. That's when we become complete. I am able to identify myself in my own program where I'm off key in relation to those spiritual principles, mind, body, and spirit. I'm able to pinpoint that thing. The more and more I practice it, I'm able to establish where I'm off key at particular points, whether it's my 10, 11, 12. That's the daily reprieve steps that I follow for the rest of my life. Whenever a sponsee calls me and tells me they're having a bad day, we're able to pinpoint exactly within those spiritual principles where they're at. Is it your 10? Is it your 11? Is it your 12? Is it something else? Let's get into the center of the triangle. What's missing? Are you practicing your steps? Are you going to your meetings? Are you being of service? We're able to pinpoint exactly and readjust the dial for them to continue to practice, continue to be complete, continue to be whole. It's so easy. We could miss it. It's so easy. We complicate the life out of this program, and we don't have to, because if you follow the clear-cut directions, you cannot go wrong. It's a cast-iron guarantee that you will be able to recover. Now, there are those that cannot and would not see our way of life. That is a line from the last page of Bill's story, and I understand that completely. There are those who could not and would not see our way of life. It's just as simple as that. That is very, very rare in my experience from sponsoring people, but that's sometimes what happens. But the other thing is that if, that little word that I'll emphasize all the way through as we go through this study, If is a very conditional word. If you do the work, it works. If you don't, it won't. That's how simple it is. Get a sponsor, work the steps. You will have a spiritual awakening as the result of them. We know that once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. They tell us that in the book. We know that we're recovered, but we're never cured. Tells us that in the book. But we've recovered from this hopeless, beyond medical aid state of mind and body. It tells us in the book. And they're going to show us this chain of events that they're going to show us will bring all of this to life. And not only will it bring it all to life, it will bring it into your life. There's a significant difference in bringing it to life and actually it becoming your way of living. How beautiful is that? So turn the page, contents, we're going to do that too. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be doing the preface and the forewords. The forewords are a really important part of understanding our fellowship and the history of where we come from and why we do this stuff. Why the first 100 put so much time, effort and energy. Why they were so convinced by this solution and why they feel it's so important for this message to be carried in its truest form, to be able to help more and more and more people recover from this hopeless state of mind and body. And your step 1 actually begins in the foreword to the 2nd edition. So that'll be interesting. So we're going to cover the preface where you get your first action in the program as well. Interestingly enough, not very many people may know that. I'm sure there's lots on this meeting that do, but your first action comes from the preface. So we're going to cover all of the forewords. And as we go through, step 1 is covered. Again, I'll send a photograph of this if anybody wants it. The first step, some of it begins in the foreword to the 2nd edition, but it is then covered in totality from the doctor's opinion, Bill's story, there is a solution, more about alcoholism. So if you're sitting in the room and you think step 1 is chapter 1, no, it's not. Step 1 runs from the doctor's opinion, all of the Roman numerals, which I don't really understand, right the way through actually to page 45. The first 2 pages of We Agnostics cover the unmanageability of our lives. So the first third of the book, it's 50 and a quarter pages really, 52 and a quarter pages deals with step 1. So it's not just the short form when you hear it read out, or it's not what you're reading on the scrolls on the wall. We Agnostics covers step 2. Chapter 5, How It Works, covers step 3 and 4. Chapter 6, Into Action, covers step 5 right the way through till 11. Chapter 7, Working with Others, Sponsorship. That's it. You'll hear people say in the rooms, sponsorship's not mentioned in the big book. No, it's not. The word sponsor and sponsorship is not mentioned in the big book because the people that wrote it didn't understand and didn't know that they were being called a sponsor. It was the little nurse in the hospital that released the patients to members of Alcoholics Anonymous that called the people sponsors. They completed the little form and said, Joe Bloggs is leaving the hospital, sponsor Bill W. They didn't know they were being called sponsors until after the book was printed, but they still chose not to change the words. It was the nurse on the reception. So that's why it's not mentioned in the big book, but there's a whole chapter devoted to working with others. Your 12th step, when you have a spiritual awakening as the result of the steps, it's a beautiful chapter that gives you so much guidance. And then chapters 8 through to 11 are practicing these principles in all of our affairs. The rest of step 12. So that's your contents. Throws a little few myths in there as well, because often if you're working with, if you're doing this book by yourself, you're not going to understand what the chapters relate to, really. It's important to know that. But your sponsor, again, will take you all through that. Flick through the personal stories, get to the preface. I'm going to come back to the personal stories in a second. Julian, you're going to have to keep me right over the course of the next lot of weeks, because if I'm going into too much detail, you'll need to rein me in. But I'm doing this as I do it. I'm doing this as it's been given to me. I've got nothing else to give you. So the preface. It's important to know that sometimes in the print run the numbers might be different, but essentially the preface is telling us that, well, I'll read the first paragraph. This is the 4th edition of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, and the first edition appeared in April 1939. Okay, and the words haven't changed. And in the following 16 years, it talks about the number of copies. The second edition was released in 1955. The third edition was released in 1976. And the fourth edition, which many of you will be working from, has been released in 2001. The line that is important here in the second paragraph is because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. This is our basic text. It's a textbook like you would have had at school. A maths textbook, a French textbook. It was there to be studied. This book is here to be studied. And from the study, you then apply the principles. It has to be studied with somebody that knows what they're talking about, who has had the spiritual awakening as a result of the steps. It's so incredibly important, that line. And it talks about recovery. We're already talking about recovery. Right from the get-go, they're talking about the fact that we can overcome this thing. It then goes on in the rest of that chapter to talk to you about, I call it like the architecture of the book, how the book has changed in the personal stories at the back. Okay, so the personal stories, if you're in the 4th edition, begin on page 170. Dr. Bob's Nightmare, that's the first personal story. Those are the pieces that have changed over the course of the years, okay? And the reason why the personal stories have changed over the course of the years is because the demographics within the fellowship have changed, and what Alcoholics Anonymous has wanted to do is to share more and more personal stories about how different people have recovered from different walks of life. Because in the beginning, the people that were part of the fellowship were of a very particular demographic, but as the mushrooming process occurred and there was more and more recoveries, more and more people from different types of backgrounds and from across the world ultimately started to recover. Therefore, the personal stories were important to be included. I hasten to add, though, the personal stories are not the program of recovery. They give you a clear-cut idea, like it says later on in the book, of how the individual found the God of their understanding. But they're not the instructions. They're not the clear-cut directions. They are there for a very specific reason, and I'm going to point that out to you just now. So the rest of this piece of the preface is all about the architecture of the book. If you turn the page to the second page of the preface, again, it talks about part 1, part 2 of the stories, what was included, what was not included, when they introduced the traditions into the text, when they introduced the concepts of world service into the text, etc., etc. But the important point, if you go to the end, the last paragraph, this paragraph is so important for the newcomer. This is where you get your first instruction. This is where you get your first course of action. And it simply says this, so it's the bottom of page XII. All changes made over the years in the big book, AA's font nickname for this volume, have had the same purpose: to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately and thereby to reach more alcoholics. And here's the instruction. If you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me. Or more important, yes, I felt like that. Or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too. So with a newcomer at this point, I'll be saying to them every single week from now on in, you read a personal story from the back of the book. You start at Dr. Bob's Nightmare. You start at page 170. And you might want to do half a story in the morning and half a story in the evening, almost like a morning and nighttime routine. Otherwise, just read in the next week. And I would ask you guys to do this as well. In the next week, read a personal story. And what you're going to read it for is that you're going to try to identify with, did I drink like this? Did I think like this? Did I feel like this? And at the end of the story, is this program going to work for me too? Again, Julian, I'll send this to you if anybody wants to know. So you're reading the personal stories, and this is a clear-cut instruction, direction. You read the stories in the order in which they're presented in the book. You don't pick and choose what way you do this. You read story 1, then you read the next, then you read the next. You don't jump from part 1 to part 2 to part 3. You don't jump from story 1 to story 5 and then pick up story 38. Read them in the sequence in which they're set out in the book. It's important. They're set out in there for a reason. And I'll tell you the reason when you need to know. But all we're just going to do is show up and keep on turning the pages and let the book do the work. That's the miracle of it. Let the book do the work. So you're reading the personal stories, Dr. Bob's Nightmare, this week, knock your heart out. Did I drink like that? Did I think like that? Did I feel like that? And at the end, did this program work for me too? I'm not going to tell you the reason why we're reading the stories. You don't need to know. We grow where we're planted. My sponsees hate it when I say that because they want to jump ahead. They want to find out. You know, I reference the fact that this is a textbook and it used to be like your maths textbook at school. Well, I used to go to the back of the book to find the answers. I used to want to cut out all of the stuff in between. The answers don't lie at the back of this book in the personal stories. The answers lie within the text, and the answers lie within you. And that is where you're going to find the solution. Deep down within you. That's exactly the purpose of this book. And together, over the next lot of weeks, you're going to find it. If you haven't already. So the foreword to the first edition, I'm going to quickly race through that. Oh my goodness me, this first paragraph. So amazing. We of Alcoholics Anonymous. First little note. The we of Alcoholics Anonymous is not every Tom, Dick and Harry sitting in the rooms that you're sitting in now. No. The we of Alcoholics Anonymous are the people that wrote this book. There was actually 73 of them, but we rounded up to 100 because it's easier. So we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered. Circle that word if I was you. There it is. We're not even into the pages of recovery. We're not even into the program of action. We're not even into it yet. And we're talking about recovered, past tense. What have we recovered from? A seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Get this next line. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. Italicized, precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. Why are we not using this book? What are we at? What are we doing sitting in the meetings, just showing up and talking about our problems and all of that? That's okay if you're a newcomer. But if you've been in the rooms for a period of time, you get a sponsor, you get a book, you work the steps like the desperation of a drowning man, because this book shows you precisely how we've recovered. So what are you doing if you're not doing this? For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. I don't need to go anywhere else for any authentication of my recovery and what's going to keep me sober and what my problem is. Every single answer, every single question that's posed, the answer is in this book. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. It's in here. It's in the 164 pages. Now I do loads of extra reading of all sorts of spiritual books and practices and all of that. Phenomenal what Alcoholics Anonymous has been able to do for me to learn more about spiritual practices and spiritual laws and all of that. Phenomenal. But the prescription that I need for my addiction is here. I don't need to go anywhere else for any further authentication. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. This book was written for doctors, the wives, the family afterwards. It was written for religious people to help everyone better understand the alcoholic. Because get this, many do not comprehend that the alcoholic addict is a very sick person. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. It's incredible. It has advantages for all. Everybody that we touch, everybody that we interact with. And it goes into a little bit here in the next about the tradition 11, the anonymity around ourselves. I'm not going to get into all of that. It's a bit of a myth that needs to be busted as well. But if I want to tell people I'm an alcoholic and share my surname, then I will. In meetings, I'm Mags D. In this environment, I'm Mags D. But in my home group, I use my full surname. I'm allowed to do that because within the meeting, people should know who I am. At the level of press, radio and television in Tradition 11, of course, I'm an alcoholic and that's all I identify with. All right. But back in the day when they started to write this book, they had to remain anonymous. There was only a little handful of them running around trying to give people this. They were in particular professions and all of that. So they kept themselves anonymous. But what they're saying here in the last line of this next paragraph is, although they're being anonymous because they're businessmen and have, occupations, we would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation. So what they're talking about there is sponsorship. Carrying this message in sponsorship is an avocation. It's a hobby. They do it for free. They do it because they want more and more people to recover. They're telling us here, we're doing it. You must do it. It's part of your recovery too. They then continue to go on about the anonymity and Tradition 11. If you go to the bottom line at the bottom of this page, we are not an organisation in the conventional sense of the word. We're not an organisation in the conventional sense of the word. That couldn't be clearer. There are no fees or dues whatsoever. We have our Tradition 7. That's it. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. Now, in our traditions, they've taken out the word honest. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. When I first came into the rooms, I wasn't honest about my desire to stop drinking. And back in the day, there was lots of people that weren't honest about their desire to stop drinking, continued to be drunk, and in the outside world, it looked as if Alcoholics Anonymous wasn't working. But that wasn't the case. It was because they weren't doing the work. So now, the only desire for membership is that to stop drinking. Okay? I have to be honest. I wasn't honest when I came into the rooms. I was still drinking when I was in the rooms. I was still using when I was in the rooms. Because I didn't know how to stop. But I'm just pointing that out to you, that within the traditions, it's an honest desire to stop drinking. If you say you're an alcoholic addict, you're a member. There's no other situation that you need to declare other than that. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect or denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. That's it. We are not a religious program for anybody new that's sitting in here. It's a spiritual program, and we learn more about that as we go along. The humility of the people that wrote this book is so incredible. Listen to this line. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. We should like to be helpful to such cases. So if you've got this book and you've started out on sponsorship, we want to know. We want to hear what you're doing. For all of the people, the doctors, the religious people and all of that, in their next line, inquiry by scientific, medical and religious societies will be welcomed. These guys had no idea the power of where this book was going to take them to. They were so humble that they were saying, we want to hear from you. We want to know if this is working. We want to understand what we can do to help you. That's how the fellowship was built. That's how we got more and more people interested in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's why, Dr. Percy Pollock got involved. That's why Carl Jung got involved. That's why, Reverend Sam Shoemaker and all of those people got involved. These were people that were in communities that were seeing alcoholics and addicts dying of this progressive illness. And the people that wrote this book were reaching out with friendly hands and saying, we want to help you. And that's exactly the way this fellowship should be now, through our, PI work and CPC work, wherever you are in the world. That might have different titles. But the humility of these men and women is just incredible. So I don't know whether I'm not going to start into the forward to the second edition. We can do that over the next couple of weeks. I hope there has been some information, conscious of time as well, that the little buzzer might be about to go, Julian. But I hope there has been information in there that has been of interest, that has busted a couple of myths for you. If there's any questions or anything, get my number. I'll put it in the chat. Message me. I'll clarify if I've gone too fast for people. But I hasten to add that if you're going to call or speak to me about an opinion or a judgment that you don't agree with, that is given to you differently, then I'm not going to get involved in any controversy. Like they say later on in the book, I don't get involved in windy arguments or controversy about the book. The book is the book. The words are the words. The meanings are the meanings. How I apply it in my life and my spiritual way of living is how I do it. And if I can help you, I can help you, but I ain't going to get into any windy arguments, because I do not want to cause any controversy. I'm here to help you. I'm here to carry this message, having had a spiritual awakening by doing it. So enjoy the personal story over the next week. And look forward to next week. I do hope that you do come back. Stay. Don't keep coming back. Just stay.